the consumer price index report actually talked about mortgage costs going up by 20% in 2024. They're saying, well, it only increased by 5% in 2025. So you already have that 20%, and then you have 5% on top of that. It's 25%. Your mortgage costs have increased in 2 years. Speaking of data, speaking of Mark Carney, and speaking about his own government. So I think a lot of people are aware of one of the metrics that came out this week, but there's a lot more to the story. So every month, the Consumer Price Index report comes out in addition to the job report, but job report is going to be coming out in a couple of weeks, so we don't have that for February yet, but we're very interested to see what it says. But as for right now, we're going to take a look at the Consumer Price Index report for January of 2026, and let's see how Mark Carney is doing.
So this is our inflation metric.
So ladies and gentlemen, this is a summary from StatsCan of the Consumer Price Index report. So all items Consumer Price Index, you're looking at around 2.3% year over year. That is within the range or the target range of the Bank of Canada for inflation. The target range is between 2 and 3%. However, the big story was food, 7.3% year over year. So what that means is from January of 2025 to January of 2026, food has gone up by 7.3%. And December was high at around, what was it, 6.3? Something like that?
I think so, yeah.
6.3%?
Yeah, it was just above the 6. You can see it there on the chart.
So in December of 2025, it was at 6.3%, and January 2026, a year later, at 7.3%. That is insane. Some of the other highlights is that alcoholic beverages, so that is going up, and it's going to go up even more once the alcohol tax is increased in April. So get ready for that. And some of the other highlights: recreation, education, and reading. So that has gone up significantly since January of last year. Health and personal care has gone up. Transportation has dropped significantly. Surprise, surprise, people aren't buying cars anymore. And clothing and footwear, that's gone up a little bit. And household operations, furnishings, equipment, that's still increasing, but not as badly as December from last year, but it's still going up. Housing prices, which they call shelter because that's technically mortgages, but also rent all amalgamated together. On an average annual basis, shelter prices rose to a lesser extent in 2025, 3% compared with 2024 at 5.7%. Price growth in mortgage interest costs slowed to 5.3% only in 2025, down from 20.1% increase in 2024. Rent prices also rose at a slower pace in 2025 at 5% compared with 2024 at 8.2%, with price growth decelerating in all provinces. Prices in Alberta led the slowdown. Rent prices in this province rose 3.8% in 2025, following a 12.5% increase in 2024, when strong demand from high net interprovincial migration to Alberta pushed prices higher. Despite a smaller increase in 2025, national rent prices have risen 28.5% since 2020.
Well, and how much did it rise in 2020? Because that's when we saw a lot of people were moving out of cities and moving more towards the suburbs because they wanted to get away from COVID.
And because everybody was looking to buy houses, the housing market exploded. And then in 2021, the Century Initiative took over.
I was going to say, never mind our record immigration.
So what the Liberals were probably going to say is, look, everything's coming down. Prices are coming down. That's what they'll probably try and say. Even though, as we all know, what this tells you is prices are not coming down. Acceleration, or the rate of increase, of prices have dropped in some areas. But the rate of food increase, it's not that food has increased by 7.3%, because we all know food has increased by more than 7.83%. But the rate at which food is increasing has gone up by 7.3%. So every month it gets more expensive and more expensive and more expensive and more expensive. It just fluctuates as to, did it get more expensive? Or did it get more than more expensive? Or less than more expensive? Because food prices have not come down.
Yeah, the only one that had negative growth in there was transportation.
Right.
And I find it interesting that when this report came out, the liberals were all like, oh yeah, inflation's only 2.4%. And that is, that's right within our goal. And, yay us, pat on the back. But in reality, when you go into the numbers, the reason that it is so low, despite the food being so high at 7.3%, is because everything else around it was bringing down that average.
Right.
But I mean, we need food pretty much more than anything else in the world. So when that goes up, Canadians really do suffer.
Now, the other thing that they will say is, oh, well, housing prices, housing prices. So houses are still getting more expensive, just at a lower rate than they used to. Now, in some cases, we've seen housing prices drop, but that's because they've dropped in relation to their peak at COVID. And this is where people are starting to have a problem. And we put out our video on the mortgage crisis, which it's begun. We've seen it. Delinquencies have increased just in Ontario by 60%, which is crazy. And banks are now using power of sale, meaning they're not foreclosing on your house and taking your house. They're selling your house. And then saying, okay, you owed $400,000 remaining on your mortgage. We were able to get your home for about $300,000 in our pocket. So you still owe us $100,000, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Thank you very much. And that's what many families are actually having to face. So, and you saw the Consumer Price Index report actually talked about mortgage costs going up by 20% in 2024. So this is the catch, right? So those costs don't go away. They've already gone up. And so they're saying, well, it only increased by 5% in 2025. So you already have that 20%, and then you have 5% on top of that. It's 25%. Your mortgage costs have increased in 2 years. And all these people with fixed mortgages at these super low rates, this is the year.
Yes, this is the year, because a lot of them got their mortgages or renewed their mortgages in 2021 for ultra low rates. Remember, interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn.
Yeah.
And 2026 is 5 years later. So unfortunately, a lot of people are going to be in for some trouble.
So I feel for these people.
Yeah.
I feel for these people. There's going to be a lot more people. And we saw many in the comments. People know people. How do you not know somebody right now that has lost their home? So, but we're not done. Cellular prices put downward pressure on the Consumer Price Index, if you can believe it. Year over year, prices for cellular services decelerated in January only by 4.9%, compared with December at 14.6%, due to base year effect following 6 consecutive months of upward pressure. On a month-over-month basis, prices declined in January 2026 by 0.8%, after increasing in January 2025 by 8.3%. And this is the annual average for inflation. And this is interesting, folks, because you may think, okay, well, maybe we're all right. 2025 for the year was at 2.6. Maybe we're all right. Well, if you look into this a little closer, because this goes all the way back to 2011 during the Harper years, right? This is where 2.6 is. So this is still as high as it has been for over 15 years, if you take COVID out of the picture. So this is something to consider. Now, the good news if there's any good news during a recession, the good news during a recession is you don't typically see inflation increase because your economy is contracting, people are spending less, and so interest rates usually stay down and inflation usually stays down to try to spur investment into the economy. But the state of Canada right now is that people aren't spending, but the interest rates aren't coming down. And this is because inflation is fighting against the economy. And this is what Pierre has talked about. If people are spending less, then interest rates should be coming down. But that's assuming inflation is at a normalized rate. But you have all of these pressures and elastics that are pushing and pulling on inflation that it's not really 2.4%. It technically is, because that's the amalgamation of all of those different price indexes. But this is why you have to dig deeper into these reports to really understand what's going on. So this is the message for Canadians. We have to continue to watch the consumer price index. We have to continue to watch these job reports. We have to continue to watch the fact that Canadian Housing Agency is saying, yeah, we're not getting these 500,000 housing starts like Mark Carney has been saying.
Well, and they're still delaying them at the municipal level. I mean, we got a letter in the mail the other day that one of the farmers around the area had sold their lot and they want to put in some subdivisions. And it was blocked by the city because they said, oh, you're not allowed to do that because no urban expansion. We need homes, like desperately. And our municipal government is blocking it.
So this is the type of data that's coming out of Mark Carney's own government. It trumps, excuse the pun, any promise that he makes, and it completely cuts through all of the talking points and the noise. So whenever you're talking to Canadians out there and they're crowing about how great things are and Mark Carney has been great for the economy, show them and make sure they know this is Mark Carney's government's own numbers. His ministers are in charge of these agencies, and this is the data that is being put out, and it tells a completely different story.